Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us at this tail end of the day. So we are here to do a masterclass on deploying Azure Active Directory Application Proxy with PingAccess. So this is a scenario that we've had a few talks about already today and this week. So out of curiosity, how many of you went to the talk on Monday or Tuesday or the one this morning already on this scenario? Okay, awesome. So a lot of you. So you have some context on this. I am Harshini Jayaram. I'm the Feature Program Manager for Application Proxy, and I'm here with Tarek.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Tarek Dawoud, and I'm a program manager of the Identity Division. I am in the customer success team, which works with customers who are deploying Azure Active Directory. So I'm here to provide insight from what we see out there in deployments. The main focus and difference between this talk and the other talks is we're going to focus more on the app proxy deployment pieces and why they're set up the way they're set up, as opposed to, for example, Mark's talk on Monday, where he was focusing, showing you more the PingAccess configuration part. Okay, so a bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today is basically what is the solution trying to solve? What problem are we trying to solve today with this whole PingAccess plus app proxy solution? We're going to do an architecture overview of how it works. And then Harshini is going to walk you through an actual demo of deploying app proxy with PingAccess, focusing more on the Azure Active Directory pieces and kind of explaining how they fit together. And then we'll do a bit of discussion of troubleshooting and debugging tips at the end on what we've seen out there. So let's go with the overview. I'm sure you've seen this slide for the 17th time today or this week. So as a quick recap, and also important to understand that Azure Active Directory was recently named in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for access management. It used to be called IDaaS, if those of you who remember last year or the year before. So now it's called, what does that mean? That's kind of actually a very important point. It means it's no longer about being an STS and a token broker. It's also about having access management, being able to do MFA, self-service password reset, access reviews, things like that. So we're no longer just about token issuance. We were never only about that, but now I think they're now recognizing that the quadrant as a whole has to be about the whole solution, and that IDaaS providers are expected to be where on-prem solutions were back in the day. So that's the key point that we're trying to call out here, is that Azure Active Directory, in the center of all these things, your reality is going to be that you have on-premises things, and you have SaaS, and you have cloud things, and then you have identities coming from customers and partners, all of them trying to get through an untold number of devices to your resources. And we'd like Azure Active Directory to be in the center of all of this to help give you that central control plane, so that you don't have to remember to delete Bob from Salesforce when you fire him in AD, or that when you put an MFA policy to secure your CIO on Office 365 and Exchange Online, you don't have to also do some equivalent hacky solution when he's trying to get to this on-premises app. It's all one central control plane where you can see the user, see what they're accessing, and control them in one place. That's what we're hoping and striving to get to, and what we're hoping you guys will use Azure Active Directory for. Now, the Azure AD Application Proxy specifically targets that link to on-premises. It's trying to help you build that bridge to on-premises apps. Those of you how many of you are in the process of moving on-premises apps to the cloud? There you are. So most of you. And those of you who are in the process of doing that know that there are different categories. One is, I'm going to rewrite the app. How many of you think or are trying to do that? Yes, he's like 2 hands. It's because it's hard, because it requires a lot of work. It requires Vittorio's talk, right? It requires actually rewriting the code, changing the authentication somehow, cracking open an application that you bought 15 years ago. Those kind of scary scenarios. Another one is lift and shift. How many of you are thinking about lift and shift? That seems easier, right? And App Proxy offers you a third paradigm, which is keep the app exactly where it is. And if it's of a certain types of apps, there are certain scenarios that App Proxy supports really well, then you can just keep the app as it is, and you still get the single sign-on and the Azure Active Directory protection, and the intelligent cloud and all that stuff. So, moving forward, what does the application proxy offer you? First and foremost, remote access as a service. What that means is we have an Azure cloud service running that is receiving requests to your apps, that is handling the basics of DOS, for example, and DDoS, and then it funnels down to on-premises traffic that it thinks should go down to on-premises. And as a higher mode of that service is that it can also do pre-authentication. So it can authenticate the user in Azure Active Directory, and then based on that authentication, try to impersonate them down to on-premises rather than send them to an app that pops up a login form. The second thing it allows you to do is extend Azure Active Directory to on-premises. As we mentioned, the control plane extends down to on-premises. That promise tends to offer you the following benefits, right? Simplicity. First and foremost, you're able to start erasing your DMZ piece by piece, right? No longer do you have to put some TMG on your DMZ zone or some gateway to receive these requests and handle the DOS and the DDoS and all that stuff. It offers you productivity. Now, mobile workers somewhere out there in the world can access that legacy app that you require them to access to punch in their hours or put in their expense reports. Now they can do it from while they're on the road. And it's protected and secure. At the end of the day, the connector that you install on-prem only does an outbound connection. It is secured over 443. We take the brunt of most of the attacks and hacks and all the stuff, and you benefit from the intelligent cloud and the fact that this guy is being hammered on because we see all these things and we surface them to you. The app proxy is a very, you can think of it as a very handy tool. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You can do a bunch of things with it depending on your scenarios and the types of apps you're moving. So the top left one is the coolest scenario, which is the one with Windows Integrated Auth. So any application you have today running on premises with Windows Integrated Auth, as long as it's just vanilla Kerberos, right? Then you can publish with the app proxy remotely and not have to put any DMZ whatsoever. And its setup is as quick as 5 to 10 minutes. We will have a dedicated session in future years, and you can actually look it up online. There are actually sessions showing you how to set it up, create an SPN, install the connector, and then configure in the cloud a bunch of URLs, and you're set. The next mode is form-based auth. This is more where you're not benefiting from the pre-authentication. You're saying, I just need you to take me down to on-premises. I have a customer who deployed this to BombGuard. They have BombGuard installed on premises for their help desk, and simply the app proxy simply just provides the skipping the DMZ part and tunneling the traffic down to on premises. The third one, the one we're going to dig deep on today is obviously the one on the top right, the header-based apps. I'll skip that for now because we're going to talk about the architecture in a bit. And then rich clients web apps. So I have a client who's deployed this in SharePoint on-prem 2010 with Kerberos, and they have Word and Excel rich clients that are able to authenticate and come down and access those libraries remotely. Again, not having to do any DMZ whatsoever, and not being able to lift and shift to Azure at that time. Other apps through remote desktop, so we're also able to publish remote desktop through the application proxy. If you are using Internet Explorer Edge, you can actually get single sign-on into the machine. If you don't, then you're gonna get a prompt at the machine to log into the machine itself. But if you use Edge and IE, you actually get to log into the machine straight with the cloud credentials you use to authenticate to the app proxy. So the scenario we're talking about today specifically, this is the vanilla app proxy scenario, but the one we're going to talk about and dig deep into is app proxy with PingAccess. And the basics here are going to be that when the request comes from the user to a URL, the URL is configured as protected by Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory does the authentication, gets a credential, now there's a token. The token is given to the application proxy. The proxy through the connector finds PingAccess, submits the token to PingAccess. PingAccess will look at the token, and then based on the configuration you put in PingAccess, which Mark demonstrated and which we'll cover lightly today, PingAccess will reach out to Azure Active Directory and request a new OIDC token on behalf of that user for its sessions. But it will be within the Azure Active Directory session that originally came to it. And then it will use that token and also augment it with the claims it needs to stuff headers to the applications, the legacy apps on premises. that's kind of how the solution works. And here to demonstrate to you how all of that actually looks like is back to Harshini.
Hello. So let's actually dig into this and walk through a full deployment starting from the get-go. So if you're deploying this scenario from scratch, you don't have application proxy yet, you don't have PingAccess yet, here are the 7 steps you need to go through, and we're going to go through those today. So it's going to start by setting up application proxy itself. Once you have application proxy, you need to actually configure your application that you're trying to use in this scenario. So we'll create that application in Azure Active Directory. That's the application proxy side of it. Next, we'll go into PingAccess and show a little bit of how you download and install PingAccess, get the license for that. And then you need to configure the application in PingAccess so you can do some of that mapping that Tarek alluded to earlier. At that point, you do have a working end-to-end. So step 5, we're just going to test that end-to-end and make sure that what we've done so far is successful. But here's the thing. At that point, yes, you have an app. Yes, you can share it with your users. But you're not yet leveraging a lot of the benefits that you get from this scenario. You're not yet pulling in that cloud scale security and all the additional benefits. So we've added a step 6 and 7. In step 6, we're going to leverage the control plane and start adding some of those security protections that you've heard about today. You may have seen in Alex's keynote this morning. We're going to show how you start layering some of those on. And finally, we're going to test the new end-to-end that uses some of that protection. So this is our ambitious agenda for the rest of this session. So let's start with how you install and configure the application proxy. So for that, there are kind of 3 core steps here. There are a few prerequisites that you need to make sure that you've met before going down this deployment. Then we'll actually enable the feature within your Azure Active Directory tenant. And finally, we'll need to get a connector. This is the piece that in the infrastructure diagram, if you remember, is creating the tunnel between your on-premises network and the application proxy service. So we're starting off with the prerequisites. In this case, application proxy is a part of Azure Active Directory, so you do need a subscription. The PingAccess, like this scenario and the 20 applications that you get for free with your license, requires it to be a premium subscription. For the connector, you'll need a Windows Server 2012 R2 or 2016 machine, and because these connectors are serving kind of as a channel between the service and the application, you need to make sure that the machine that you're putting the connector on does have a connection and a line of sight to the target application. For these machines and for the connector, while you can put it in the DMZ, we don't recommend it. It's not needed. The connector is only using outbound connections, and a lot of what you look for in a DMZ, like terminating the traffic, that all happens in the service. So you can put it in the DMZ, but it's not recommended. You also need to make sure that your network is open to reach the service. So for that, you need to have ports 443 and 80 open, and you need to make sure that you're allowed to connect to star.msappproxy.net and star.servicebus.windows.net. These are the application proxy specific requirements. We do, of course, also use Azure Active Directory authentication, so those login URLs need to be allowed as well. Okay, so that's a prerequisite. Let's dig in and actually start configuring. So from here, we're going to switch over into the portal, but you can start all of this at aad.portal.azure.com. If you want, you can also start at portal.azure.com, the typical Azure portal, but you can just fast track to the Azure Active Directory part with that link. So give me just one moment to switch over. Okay, so here I've gone to the Azure portal. Zoom in just a little bit. It's a little bit easier to read this way. So from here, let's go into Azure Active Directory, because again, application proxy is a part of that. You'll see that there's a menu option here on the left, application proxy. So we're going to go directly into that. Now, I actually had this already enabled, but here I'll show you. Typically when you come to it for the first time, it's not going to be enabled. It's going to be disabled. And all you have to do is come up here and click enable in order to get application proxy enabled for your tenant. The reason we have a button there is that we know that you want to be very aware and very conscious of what you're opening your on-premises network to. So we know that it's a conscious decision and want you to have that control to say that yes, we're ready to deploy application proxy. Let's turn step 2 of deploying. And the last thing is we need to get a connector. So there's a download connector icon right here. When you click on it, it takes you to a connector download page. Once you accept the terms, you hit download, and momentarily, we'll see the installer pop up. So once again, terms and agreements, and click install. As it goes through the installation process, it is going to pop up with another request for me to authenticate to make sure that I am a global admin, that I do have permission to put this agent on the machine. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my credentials. Hope I typed it right the first time. And so now once it's done authenticating me, it'll let me know that, hey, you succeeded. If you want to double check everything's working, you can, or you can just go ahead and close the installation.
So Harshini,
Yeah.
they're supposed to do this on their laptops or
Oh,
where?
yes, thank you, Tarek. So I just showed you this here, but as I mentioned, this should happen on your Windows Server 2012 R2 or 2016 machine, the one that hits all the prerequisites that we just talked about, so line of sight for the application and so on. Thank you, Tarek.
So it should be the one that's actually accepting authentication requests within your application.
Yes, so it should be there. Okay, so that's step 1 of 7. We are now good to go with application proxy. The only problem is we don't have any applications to use it with. So let's go ahead and create an application. So you'll notice from the same page, you can see this, that if you want to create or manage an on-premises application, click this link. You can also get to that same point over here on the left through enterprise applications. Both of these take you to the same spot. And so this page that's coming up is where you go even after you've created the application if you want to manage it. So here we're going to go and click Add at the top since we're adding a new application. And it's going to give us a few different options for the types of apps that we may want to create. In this case, we're looking to do an on-premises application. So let's go ahead and select that. Zoomed in awkwardly. So the application that we're creating is called Travel Dashboard. Now when you create the internal URL, it's very important to know, especially if you've used application proxy before, you are not actually putting the URL of your application. In this case, you need to make sure that you're pointing to the PingAccess instance so that your traffic goes through there and the headers can be put into the request. So essentially when we get into the PingAccess part of it, you'll see how we do the direct to the backend application. But in this case, we're pointing to our PingAccess instance. And here, we're also going to put the server that we're putting PingAccess on and a default port of 3000, which is where it's typically listening. At this point, we haven't yet configured PingAccess. You can put it on a different port if you would like. That's a configuration you can always come back and change later here in the application. But for now, we're just going to assume we're going to use the default. And if you walk through our documentation, it'll tell you the same thing. So this is where I have my PingAccess instance. Now, next is we choose the external URL. This external URL is what our remote users will access in order to get to the application. So especially, we talked about this a little bit if you were at the session this morning, but every tenant has a default option here, which is essentially the tenant name .msfproxy.net. That's the default. However, if you do have a domain and you set up a verified domain in Azure Active Directory, you can pick that domain instead. You do also need to upload an SSL cert. So for example, in this case, I could pick f128.info, but we'll just stick with the default for now. Next is the pre-authentication method. Again, we talked about two different options, either Azure Active Directory, which asks you to pre-authenticate against Azure Active Directory, or pass-through, where you kind of are just going through. In this case, we're looking for the pre-authentication, and we want the single sign-on, so we choose Azure Active Directory. We don't want to translate the URL and headers because we're sending all of this down to Ping. Backend application timeout is if you have an application that takes a very long time to respond. Our app is very small, very speedy. We don't need to change that. And finally, the connector group. So if you just installed the connector the way we did, it gets put into your default group. You can create different connector groups to service different applications. Perhaps you want to group your connectors based on location or something else like that. So you can change the connector group here. Our connector in this case is in the default group, so we're going to go ahead and leave that. At this point, you'd go ahead and click Add to create the application. I've actually already created this application, so when you click Add, you end up on this screen. If I ever go to a page that's not zoomed in and not just sliding down, then I can zoom it in again. So at this point, the app is created, but it's not yet quite ready for our users. We first need to go and actually assign someone to use the application. So let's go ahead, and I want to be able to test it myself. So I'm going to go ahead and add a user. And so from here, there are a few different ways that you can do the application assignment. In my case, I'm just trying to add a single user, so I can come and search for a user. You can also do this based on groups, and your groups can be dynamically created groups. So if you choose a dynamic group, then as that group changes, the permissions to the app will change. You don't need to go in and continue managing it. So let's go ahead and assign a user. There she is. And there's one more step in this part of the setup, which is to configure the single sign-on method. So we want an application that uses headers for authentication. That's why we're doing this end-to-end. So right here, when you go to the mode, we'll pick the header-based sign-on option and click Save. Now there are a couple more configurations we need to do specifically to enable this to work with PingAccess. So I'm going to leave this page up, and you'll see why in just a couple minutes, and hop over to this tab. So essentially, before we were over here in Enterprise Applications, and again, we were over here in Enterprise Applications, we're now going to step into App Registrations, which just gives you a different view on your application. And let's go to Travel Dashboard, which is the app we're creating. And there are a few things we're going to do here. First, we just need to double check that our external URL has been configured as a reply URL. This happens by default, so this is more of just a sanity check. Indeed, it's right here. Next, we're going to go and set some application permissions that we need to allow. So in this case, you'll click on Add. We're setting these permissions for Azure Active Directory. So let's see where. Oh, I already have the policy set, but essentially when we go into that, we set these two permissions: read and write applications and sign in and read your user profiles. So we're basically allowing the access that we need for PingAccess. And finally, in this section, the last thing we need to do to configure this application is to go and create a brand new key. So this is a key that we're going to give to PingAccess that it can use during all of the communication. So the way you create this key is essentially you give a description, you set a duration, and when you click Save, a value gets populated here that you can then save and use when you go to create PingAccess. So again, I've already created one, but that's how you would add the key. When you do create the key, make sure you take note of it, because after you've created it and you navigate away from the page, it'll be hidden. So just make sure to take note. So at this point, we've completed step 2. We have an application. We've done all the additional configurations needed to make sure that we have the information to go and configure PingAccess. So let's go and configure PingAccess. And that's why I kept this page up. So when we select header-based sign-on, this was in the application when we were looking at the single sign-on options, there's this header-based sign-on. And the page has some information about our partnership, including these step-by-step instructions. But also at the bottom, you get this information box that says, you need to install PingAccess, and if you haven't, here's where you start. So you click on the link right there, and we will send you over to PingAccess, where at this point, you go ahead and you fill out the information, you click Submit, and you'll be directed to get a license and to download PingAccess. So again, PingAccess also needs to be on your on-premises network, because if you remember the infrastructure diagram, the traffic is flowing from the connector to PingAccess to the application. So I'm not going to walk through that install and download now, and if you want more information on that portion of it, I recommend you go back and see Mark's talk earlier this week or catch one of us afterwards. And I'll give you the documentation link at the end as well that walks through all of these steps in more detail. Once you've installed PingAccess, that's step 3. Step 4, we need to configure the application in PingAccess. So let's hop over to our on-prem network. virtual host. And so this, and throughout this one, I'm going to show you what I've configured. I'm not going to walk through in as much depth again to kind of complement Mark's talk from Monday. But if you want the details, you can refer back to his talk as well. So hopefully that's a little bit easier to read. So essentially for this first virtual host, you're essentially telling it where to listen to. So essentially we're looking for traffic coming from this external URL that we just configured. And it's going to be through port 443 because that's what Application Proxy uses. Next, we're going to set up a web session. So we set up each of the pieces and we'll tie it together in the fifth part, which is the application. So we configure this web session, which is essentially letting you create the policies that you want for all of your sessions that happen here through this scenario. And this is also where you're going to provide the key that we created slightly earlier. So go ahead and set, for example, timeout windows and things like that. Next, we head over and do the identity mapping. So this is where we're deciding what fields are coming down from AAD that we do want to pass along to our application. So in this case, my application really just needs the headers in order to customize the page a little bit because I have a friendly application that greets my users. So I've decided to pull in the first name and the last name. So just take a note of these two fields because when we get to the application, we're actually going to show the headers coming through, and you'll see both first name and last name. Okay, so those were 3 settings here in the access setting. Next, we need to set a site. So if you remember, when we created the app proxy application, our internal URL was pointing to PingAccess. So now we need to know where to take this traffic and where to direct it to the application, and that's why we're creating this site. So on my internal network, my site is hosted at localhost 8085, and so I'm specifying that here. And finally, it's the 5th step that I mentioned, where we create the application, and essentially we specify all the things we just created that we want to pull together for this application. So the virtual host and the session, the mappings, the site, we put all of those together into this application. So those are the 5 steps to configure your PingAccess application. And now that's kind of the end of step 4. So as we said, those are the 4 steps to configure. At this point, we have a working end-to-end. So let's go and test it out. So if you remember, we created an external URL that we can use to go and access the application. Now I'm going to go and hit that external URL. And I should be able to get to my magical travel dashboard with a little greeting for Lily. And indeed, just wait for the rest of the page to load, but essentially, here's my greeting for Lily that comes in with the application. And we can go and view the headers themselves. And as we discussed earlier, here's the first name and the last name that we asked PingAccess to put into the headers for this application. So we have a working end-to-end. Now, as we also said, at this point, I didn't really see a lot of the additional security controls. I didn't see that conditional access or the multi-factor authentication challenge for our different users. So really, in order to feel good about this application, I need to go and add those. So let's go back and add those now. When we're here looking at our application, you'll see that there's a conditional access option. So this is kind of a lot of the bucket of what Alex discussed earlier, where we can specify under what conditions we want to challenge our users and whether we want to block their access or require another challenge, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new policy in this case. And I'm going to say this applies to all of my header-based applications. So header-based application control. For users, I'm going to say at this point, I want it to be for any user. All the users who try to access this app who fit my following criteria. So for any user who comes to specifically this application. So at this point, I'm going to say I want it to only apply to Travel Dashboard. So let's select Travel Dashboard. And now, this is the exciting part, right? This is the conditions. When do I want to challenge them? When do I want to have additional restrictions? So, for example, earlier today, Alex talked about sign-in risk and how we can have a few different ways of saying, this is a high-risk session, the sign-in risk, you can set it that way. You can do it based on device platform. Am I expecting everyone to come in from mobile? Well, if they're coming from desktop, maybe I think that's a little funny. Or location, which is what we're going to do in this case. So I'm going to configure for location and say that yes, for any location, I want to challenge, except for my trusted IP addresses. So if they're coming from my on-prem network, we're fine. If they come from elsewhere, I want to challenge that. And so on. So now that we've gotten to locations, now we pick what the challenge is. What happens when you match that conditions that I just set? So I want to grant them access. I don't think it's that sketchy that I want to block them, but I want to be sure. So I'm going to require multi-factor authentication. So let's go ahead and select that. And let's enable this policy. So let's go ahead and create that. And great, validation successful, so we've created this policy. Now, let me open a new window, and let's go try this again. And let's actually try accessing our application from our standard access panel, because while we do create the external URL, you can access your application proxy application just from the access panel. So here I have to log in. Okay, great. So with this login, I'm getting into my access panel. I haven't been challenged with a multi-factor prompt as yet because I haven't yet hit anything that makes that request to me. And so as this page loads, you're going to see your Office 365 apps. You're going to see the default Azure Active Directory apps. And you're going to see all the other applications that have been assigned to this user, such as the travel dashboard that we just did. So here's travel dashboard. So let's try to get onto it now. And you see, I logged into the application. I was on the Maya Apps portal. But when I wanted to get to this specific application where I'd set further controls, I get that multi-factor prompt. So let me grab my phone and grab the code that it just sent me and put that in here so we can continue on. Oh no, I changed something. My internal URL by accident. So, one moment. This is the fun part of doing a live demo, right? You never know when you accidentally change something along the way. You're pointing things out and suddenly accidentally hit a button along the way. So, let me just check. I guess, and while we're doing this, we might as well kind of talk through a little bit of the debugging element here. So, why not? If I'm doing it, rather than doing some black magic up here, why don't we talk through it? So, the next section was troubleshooting and debugging tips anyway. So, here, just to give an idea of some of the errors you might see, there's a status code here with a little bit of a description, right? So, the application proxy was unable to reach the internal URL. Make sure the URL is reachable by your connectors, right? So this means that either I put in the wrong internal URL, so maybe I didn't actually point to the right server and I hit a button there, or sometimes, a lot of times what this means is that your connector is not actually able to see your internal application. It's a very, very common error that we see, that your connector is somewhere and is blocked from getting to the app. So if you see an error like this, that's typically what it means. So that's why I'm going to check my internal URL and make sure I didn't mess it up there. We talked through all these settings as we created the application. Anytime you want to see them or modify them, you do come right over here on the left-hand side to Application Proxy, and you can see them again. So I believe this looks like my internal URL. So I'm not sure if you want me to keep debugging this, or if you want to start talking about the troubleshooting.
Yeah, you guys saw it work earlier. Just when we're adding the MFA challenge, I think we broke something, but we can move on to the debugging if you want. There are scenarios where you need ping federate. So for this case, the application only consumes headers. Okay. In this case, you don't need anything extra. App proxy with PingAccess. With the trial version, you have up to 20 apps. You can just submit the headers to the backend apps, and they consume them. The reality of legacy apps, though, are those. How many of you have dealt with SiteMinder? Show of hands. There we go. So how many of you have SiteMinder agents serving the SiteMinder apps? There you go. So those guys will tell you that a front-end app will accept the request and then will turn around and request things from a back-end app, right? It's that back-end app usually doesn't even accept the header. What usually happens is they put a SiteMinder agent guarding that app, and that agent receives a SM session cookie and then goes back and throws it to a policy server and comes back and says, oh, I know who's supposed to. Yep, Oracle, exactly, OAM, right? And in those scenarios, I think ping federated is needed to actually mediate some of those calls. So, but if a straightforward front-end app that just looks for headers, then this is sufficient. Beyond that, I also think the ping folks, and Mark is here to help us. They have SDKs that can help you also replace some of these agents as well. So, moving on to troubleshooting. So, if you have a few tips specific to this scenario, first and foremost is, for now, we recommend you publish applications with unique FQDNs rather than same FQDN/different paths. This is a small limitation we have right now where basically the callback endpoint for PingAccess is the same. So that means that all of the different apps that you publish, when we return the token, we'll return it back to the same URL. So we have a restriction on our side that says 2 apps cannot have the same reply URL. That doesn't make sense. Like, when the user comes from one of them, where do I return him, right? So that means, so if you publish app1 as a FQDN/app1 and FQDN/app2, then when we're trying to return the user, we have our own restrictions that say you can't have the same PingAccess reply URL for both of them. So for now, if possible, try and publish them as app1.domain.com rather than domain.com/app1 to work around this limitation. We're trying to fix it in the coming weeks. Use the same internal and external FQDN. It's just easy for your users if you can, so that they don't have to remember inside the corp to say benefits, outside the corp to say benefits.company.com. If you just teach them, it's always benefits.company.com. We internally in Microsoft have moved to this model now, so all our internal and external URLs are the same. We don't have, whack benefits or whack HR and so on. Use connector groups for high availability. So as she mentioned, there are connector group that you can set up, and one of the best uses for connector groups is the dev, test, QA, prod thing. So you can have a group for dev, group for test, group for prod. We've seen cases where customers have downed their prod apps because they were rolling out a new app, and somehow they're making a bunch of traffic to it and somehow drowned out their other prod apps that are published. So make sure to at least benefit on that regard. Each group can have at least one connector in it. We obviously recommend at least 2 connectors for high availability per group. And they're very lightweight, and you can install them in other roles. They don't need their own specific Windows Server role. As we mentioned, the lightweight connector can be installed on the app itself, on PingAccess server itself. It's not that heavy. And remember to secure your header-based application. So I'm assuming those of you who have a WAM solution know this already. All these header-based apps are very simple and can be lied to very easily. So you kind of, there are different approaches. This question also came up in Mark's talk. You can cordon them off with network. You can cordon them off with other things. You can put modules in their web servers that call back to ping to make sure that the token will sign and stuff like that. So that's a necessary piece of the full end-to-end picture of the solution, is that these legacy apps need to be protected. If you're going to rely on signature, but if you're going to use network, for example, then you don't need to. So network is saying this this machine can only receive calls from that machine and point to the PingAccess server, right? This way you kind of secure it roughly. But the problem with that is if malware gets to the PingAccess server machine, it can get to the backend app as well. But there were also other modes as well.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Oh yeah, okay. So hi, I'm Mark Bosley. I'm the product manager for PingAccess. I know a lot of you guys came in on Monday early and watched me at 9 o'clock in the morning where we did a lot of the same things, except mine was completely unreadable on the screen because it got too blurry. But at any rate, yeah, so if you're securing that back-end consumption of those headers, when you say are you offloading that to PingAccess, I mean, PingAccess is setting the header, and so a lot of these scenarios involve using the functions inside of PingAccess that are available to you through the free license to be able to set those headers in a secure manner if you're running it as a proxy. If you're running it in an agent mode, which is also supported, then those agents, there isn't going to be that air gap between where the header is set and where the header is consumed, and so securing it is a lot more simple.
Cool. So moving to the last segment, I believe, is few questions. Common questions we get are like, how do I customize the JOT token? So you saw in the section where she was setting up the identity mapping in PingAccess, that PingAccess by default will expose to you the default claims that come from Azure Active Directory. But what if the header-based app requires employee ID or title, and that's not in the default Azure Active Directory token? So we are working on a solution to fix this. It is doable with some hacky stuff on our side. So for now, to avoid the hacky stuff, we're actually going to publish a method for you to actually be able to modify the token claims on that app so that when the token comes down to PingAccess, it has the extra augmented claims that it wants. So look for a solution in the next few weeks. Replacing WAM solutions is a much, so back to the SiteMinder guys. So replacing WAM solutions, as we mentioned earlier, may require ping federate for token mediation, may require extra effort. It's not as simple as simply replacing the headers. So just calling that out. And if you want to, Mark, if you want to provide more detail on.
Sure. I mean, when you're replacing a legacy web access management solution, any of you who've lived with them for any number of years know that they kind of get into all of the different pieces of access management, but they also modify your business processes. So as a guide, what we recommend to people is to make sure that the solution that you're trying to implement to replace that WAM solution can achieve all of the session requirements that you have. So there's a lot of session management capabilities that App Proxy brings to the table. You want to make sure that you can replace all the ones to meet your requirements. Replacing the policy requirements that you have, who gets access to what and when, right? And then the application integration requirements, obviously that's where PingAccess comes in. And PingAccess was designed to help modernize web access management infrastructure, and so we mimic a lot of the same integration patterns, namely using headers and whatnot. And it's a very flexible infrastructure, so you can kind of set the headers to match what you already have, so that your applications don't have to be changed to be moved behind it. When we talk about token mediation, that really is kind of an interim step. And that's a piece where you want to be able to have single sign-on between the applications that you've migrated off of a web access management solution and the applications that are still residing on that web access management solution. And so using Ping Federate, for any of you who are familiar with it in the room, we already have integration with things like SiteMinder and Oracle Access Management Manager, RSA, Tivoli, and we can create their proprietary session tokens that their agents are still going to read. And so in some cases, there are some minor configuration changes in SiteMinder. For example, you've got to tell it to trust third-party issued SiteMinder tokens. But with that change, you're going to then have all of the session tokens that you need to both access applications that are protected behind the app proxy using the Azure session, and applications that are protected still with a SiteMinder agent that are expecting the SiteMinder tokens.
Thank you. And finally, licensing. So as we mentioned, Azure Active Directory Application Proxy requires premium. The solution with PingAccess requires premium. And some of the things we showed you, like MFA, dynamic group membership, all of these are also in the premium SKU. And remember that Azure Active Directory has a lot of richness to its access management features. So for example, automatically license users on their way to stuff can be done with group-based licensing and dynamic membership groups. So you can say everybody who's employee, give them EMS and assign them to this app, and everybody whose title is this or whose department is that, and so on. Let's get to next steps. Harshini?
Yeah. Great. So as you could see, we were able to get through a deployment from end to end to a working solution very, very quickly, right? It took maybe 20 minutes of this talk. So it is something you can start playing around with and testing out pretty quickly. So if you do want the documentation that'll walk you through step by step what we kind of went through today, you can go to aka.ms/PingAccess application proxy, and there's also kind of a root application proxy documentation link up there as well. And so with that, I think we are almost out of time until the keynote, but I think we do have about 2 minutes if there are any questions.
Yes, it does. So the question was, does the health of the agent surface to Azure Active? So right now it does not show up in AD Connect Health, but it does show up in the proxy settings page she was at, remember at the beginning, where she went to application proxy regardless of apps. That one will tell you all the groups and the health of all the connectors under each group. If we don't hear back from if we can't reach a connector, we will mark it as down, and so you'll find out. But we are working on also adding it to the Connect Health.
Okay, guys, we had a real-time debugging team over here for why.
What do you think the problem was? Okay, what was the step that she did at the beginning? What did she do? She knows. So she set up the proxy connector on her machine, right? Okay, so what does that do? That puts her proxy connector within the connector group, the default connector group, which is hit based off of how close you are to it. So she was hitting her own machine, which is connected to nothing, right? So what I did was I moved that connector group to I just moved that connector somewhere else to a different connector group, and then I saved it, and then I hit the app, and it worked.
Yeah,
So Adam actually reminds me of a very important troubleshooting tip that I forgot, and this is what happens when you don't. Typically, don't actually put your applications looking at a default group, because guess what? When you create a new connector, it goes into that group, and if you forget about it, you see what happens. So I forgot to follow my own advice. Thank you, Adam and Mark, for catching that.
So just continuing the proxy setup and the requirements on the network side to, proxy to be able to connect to the endpoints. In this case, when we are using just PingAccess to connect to the applications, does the proxy need connection to the application service, or it needs access only to the PingAccess server, right? So the proxy or the network connections open for proxy to communicate to, we are saying that it needs connection to endpoints. So the endpoint for proxy, does it end at PingAccess, or does it need?
Yes.
Right, so it's just PingAccess, right? So
in the header based, remember you picked in that application, you said it's header based.
Correct.
In that one, the connector only needs line of sight to PingAccess.
PingAccess, correct.
But if you publish the second one, that one needed Windows Integrated Auth,
Sure.
then you would need line of sight.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Well, it also depends if you're running in an agent mode, then you need to be able to connect from the application proxy connector to the application where the agent is installed. If you're running PingAccess in a proxy mode, then you're connecting from the application
Sure.
proxy connector to PingAccess. So there is different.
That's correct.
And
We were mostly showing you the server mode rather than the agent mode. So.
Okay, and we'll take one last question, and then I think it'll be time for the keynote. So.
And we'll be here. I mean, we're the last thing in the day, so we'll be chilling out after.
Hey, so just a quick question. It seems to me that when you use Azure AD, it is an OpenID Connect provider. It's a SAML IDP. It issues those kinds of credentials. And the PingAccess, PingFed thing can consume those kinds of credentials and therefore provide the single sign-on. What's the value, or what are the architectural considerations for using Azure AD App Proxy to make that work?
It does the connection down, it does the tunneling down to PingAccess, so you don't have to put PingAccess on a DMZ or put a web proxy in front of it. And then the second thing is it does pass the web session initially. I think that informs PingAccess who is the user that is trying to get a token on behalf of, rather than prompting a user with another pop-up that says, who are you? Again, he just came in from Azure Active. So it does consume the web session that App Proxy passes it to say, oh, it's Bob, and then it requests a token on behalf of Bob right away without. That's why it has its own credential. That's why it has an app credential rather than, oh, let me just pop up a UI and request creds. So that's what the App Proxy is offering the PingAccess.
Great. Thank you all so much. And if you have any other questions, come find us after.